So in today's video, I sit down with millennial prepster who's a fourth generation farmer. He's not a vegan, he's actually a hunter, but he is knowledgeable about permaculture, horticulture, and he's gonna give his side of the perspective in today's video. So it's a long form conversation and we discuss a wide variety of topics. We discuss if organic is Carnist, we discuss plant nutrients and quality and soil quality, we discuss chemicals used in agriculture, we discuss different certifications of organic, we discuss hunting and ethics and a whole bunch of interesting topics. But before we get into the conversation, I want to put a clip at the start just so you can have an idea of this guy's perspective on the matter just right off the bat.
Is organic Carnist? Absolutely not. More animals will be killed. More animals are more environments destroyed using conventional methods versus using an organic type, just with an organic type mentality. So yes, I mean, if you're talking about conventional farming kills more animals than I think Carnist do, to be 110% honest with you, because in the U.S. alone, you have over 70 million birds that die every single year alone in the U.S. because of pesticides. If you're looking about the oil intensity it takes to frack, especially the Canadian tar sands, Gawars in Saudi Arabia. If you're looking at the environmental impacts they've had on climate change, the environmental impacts they've had on the world, if you're talking about diotoxins that are produced in regards to mercury in the water, this is all can be contributed to a big overhaul of our petrochemical system in which we douse everything with oil. Every product that's packaged in plastic in regards to plant products, conventionally you have 10 calories of 10 kilocalories of oil for every calorie of food that's produced here in the United States of America. So yes, conventional farming is not animal friendly. Conventional farming kills animals, and if you care about animals, you care about animal rights, you can't support conventional farming. I mean, that's just me putting it packaged really nice for you, and anybody that says otherwise is ridiculous.
So it's very interesting to get millennial prepster's perspective on this, considering he's not even vegan, he's even a hunter. And of course, this is an extremely contrasting perspective compared to, say, Vegan Gains or some of the other people who have talked about this issue in the vegan community. So I'm trying to find the truth in this matter. So consider his perspective, just that, his perspective, and I'm not exhibiting this as gospel fact. I think this is definitely an important part of the equation and a very interesting conversation, but I still need to look at more information on this topic before I can say either way definitely that organic is better than conventional or conventional is better than organic. I just need to see more data. I don't have enough research, enough facts on the topic, but this is an incredibly valuable conversation to hear millennial prepsters' side of the story. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation that we had. Okay, so I'm here with Millennial Prepster. So, Millennial, you have been working in agriculture. You said you're a horticulturalist, and maybe explain your background in producing food and farming.
Sure. So, as far as conventional farming and stuff goes, I'm not a farmer. I'm not associated with big agriculture in the slightest. I am a fourth generation permaculturist from the Blue Zones, so I have a variety of different plants that go back 4 or 5 generations. I'm really big into. I mean, you describe horticulture a little different than permaculture, but we can definitely talk about that. Permaculture is just really, when you're talking about permaculture, you're talking about a design approach. So a way to design different types of micro ecologies or systems, and there's a 12 principle template that most permacultures go by. But horticulture, permaculture, we're going to be talking for your audience's intended purposes. We're going to be talking about a lot of similar things. So yeah, so I grow my own food, fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing. Full disclosure, I'm not a vegan, but at the same time, I do think that plants and vegetables are super important. I wouldn't be here talking to you if I didn't feel that way. And I was watching that video that you had about organic, and it's just that video is super maddening, and what that gentleman was saying was not factual. So I hope that I can fill in the void from a permaculture type mentality and kind of answer some of the questions that you guys were talking about, everything from production to soil composition, whatever you want to talk about. just let me know, and we'll go through all this material, and I'll try to do it in a very bite-sized, easy fashion. Like I said, it's not incredibly difficult, but there's just certain things that are baseline that you need to understand about plants and how they grow in order to really, get to the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about, so to speak. If that
Sure,
makes
man.
sense.
Yeah, definitely. So when you were talking about the live stream, I'm assuming you were talking about the live stream I did with Will, which was on the topic of organic is carnist, or whatever that was called. That was about 6 months ago now. And it was
Yes.
like 3 hours long. I'm pretty over 3 hours, that live debate, and we covered a lot of ground. But I felt like we were both just going off facts and figures that we've tried to dig out of the internet somewhere, and just going off our sort of like best information that we could gather, without actually having any practical knowledge, without having talked to really any. I talked to some farmers on some forums to understand and a bit more about the process and some of the things there, but generally we were both just going off sort of internet data.
Can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
I don't take this wrong way. I definitely feel like the way, from somebody who has a very good understanding of this, I felt like you guys had your talking points, but you guys didn't really understand what those talking points came from, or the validity of the talking points. You know what I mean? It's like when I see on, some kind of public forum debate, you can talk about anything. When people are talking about climate change, or people are talking about guns, or people are talking about, everybody has their talking points, but nobody's really an expert in that field about those points and where they come from. So that's kind of what I felt. I agreed with what you were saying, though. Don't get me wrong. I just hope that I can explain and expound on what you were saying and give it into a bite-sized portion, which the average viewer can be like, oh, that's what he meant by that. Okay, that makes sense. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to accomplish today. But yeah, it was kind of rough for me to for me to listen to. But I will say, I think that you are onto something, and I hope that I can explain what you were talking about in a better way.
Cool, man. Yeah. As I say, like, I'm not trying to be some sort of expert on farming. I was just doing my best to come up with like a fuller picture, and sort of counter some of the claims which I thought were potentially, because this is the thing, if those claims that organic is carnist are false, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Or you say you're not vegan, but in terms of the vegan movement, we're shooting ourselves in the foot by saying, yeah, go vegan, but you can't eat any organic fruits or vegetables or nuts or seeds. You probably can't eat any tofu because most of that is organic. You can't get any tempeh because you can't get much tempeh which isn't organic, and all the vegan products and the vegan yogurts and all this sort of stuff, most of it's organic. So if you're saying, oh, go vegan, it's so easy, but you can't eat anything organic, there's so many things which you can't eat, and we really want to be careful. Is it actually correct that we're promoting organic is carnist and don't eat organic? Because from a lot of the data that I was looking at, it even seemed like it could be the other way around. It could be like organic was actually better for the animals, better for the environment, and despite the maybe slightly smaller yield. But I guess we're going to get into all of those topics of yield, of the environmental damage and the pest control and all that sort of stuff. So why don't you just start off by saying, just in terms of the most annoying thing that you were annoyed by in that conversation, you really wanted to correct, just the highest priority, and just start from there, and just lay down what really frustrated you about the conversation.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So there was a lot. So I think before we start, I would obviously like to just jump in and just kind of demolish the video, but I know maybe not everybody's seen the video. So when we're talking about organic, it's really important that we actually define what organic is. Okay. So when you're talking about organic, and for all your viewers that are gardeners out there, those of you that are really big in the gardening movement. So you have two forms of gardening. So I'm going to talk about when you're talking about organic, you're talking about either something that was grown not using fertilizers, pesticides, that kind of thing. And then you're talking about a certificate. Does that make sense? So when you're talking about a certificate, you're talking about something that was, for all intents and purposes, rubber stamped by a NOP, which stands for National Organic Program, right? So these programs will set prereqs. In the US, there's prereqs. In Canada, there's prereqs. Mexico, there's prereqs. And in the European Union, which I know you guys are kind of going through your own like Brexit, and you guys may not have the program may change where you're at based upon the political climate, but you have these programs, these organic programs that will define what something certifiably can be organic. And let me tell you, what the U.S. will certify it as organic, or as organic, is not the same as what you guys do in Europe versus what our neighbors do in Canada, et cetera. So when we're talking about organic, you can see how big of a gap that there is and how big of a difference there can be when you're talking about what organic means to you. So for the general purpose, for me, I grow organically. Now, with that being said, since the food that I consume, I consume for me, my family, my community. You know, I'm really big into our local food bank and that kind of thing. It is organic, but it's not certified organic, right? I will not be able to sell it in commerce as organic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And I think I did get into that a bit because I felt like Will was tarring, and most of these people, not just Will, like I'm not just singling him out, but everyone who's spoken about this they've just been saying organic is Carnist, full stop. And as you just mentioned, what is actually organic? Define organic. Well, it's the certification. In Europe, as you mentioned, there's different certifications. We've got Demeter, we've got Rapunzel, we've got Bioland, we've got there in Germany, and then in the UK there's a soil association, and I think you've got different grades, different tiers for the soil association or something. In America you've got the USDA organic, and there's so many different types of certification. So when you just say organic full stop, as I said in the debate, it's sort of like more organic question mark, because it's just like, what actually is organic? It's just up to the person who makes the rules and issues, rubber stamps the certificate. So
exactly, and that's why when I talked about the difference between horticulture, permaculture, as we start talking about this, you're going to see that there is definitely a divide, and you probably are already starting to see it now. That's why when we're talking about permaculturists, we talk about a 12-tier design, and that's our Bible, so to speak. That's what our go off of is. Those are the parameters in which we grow food, in which we interact with our ecosystem in general. And that takes into everything from the water concentration to the mineral in the soil to the compost to every little thing, the amount of sunlight, the amount of the animals that are naturally in that area, the types of perennial grasses that grow. So all these are things that we take into consideration. But from what it sounded, what Will was talking about, it sounded like he was just talking about big agriculture and monocropping. And so since USDA standards, since I think 2016, have allowed manure from big animal agriculture to be used in USDA gardening, therefore it's Carnist. I think that's what he was trying to draw, but he's talking about one very specific big ag industry, which quite frankly I don't support. But yeah, so I think that's what he was talking about. I think Will was trying to say, hey, in United States of America, a very common practice in Southern California is to take, because Southern California is where the biggest organic farm in the world is. Okay. SoCal Organic. And so I think what he was trying to say is, since this company, this biggest organic crop share, so to speak, uses manure from big animal agriculture, and those cows are, fed GMO, given hormones, therefore it's Carnist. I think that's what he was trying to make the connection. But as you can see, there's so many different types of gardening out there, everything from aquaponics, hydroponics, vertical gardening. There's so many different types of gardening that you can do. So to make that one blanketed statement is, it's just egregious. It's ridiculous. Obviously, I take this personally, and it means a lot to me because this is what I do. But that blanket statement he was making was just so egregious. It's worth noting. I think that's what he was trying to say.
So let's think about this in terms of the animal input nutrients. So we've mentioned manure just now. There's blood meal, there's feather meal, there's all sorts of animal sort of byproduct or waste products which you use in the agricultural industries. And would you say from your experience that on average organic is definitely using a lot more of these than conventional, or does it just depend on the farm?
So if you're talking, so when you're talking about inputs, are you asking me organic is going to use a lot more animal products versus conventional?
Yeah, for example, is organic going to be using like seaweeds and what's it called? when you do it yourself, you make your own compost. Like it's like
Compost tea.
yeah, like compost tea. That's it. The teas, the microbial things, the worm castings, the like there's like ash and there's all sorts of different things that you can use. From your
Right.
experience, like what are people actually using in sort of medium scale organic agriculture? Maybe in this sort of very, very large scale agriculture, organic agriculture, which is just like the lowest possible quality, pumping it out, just getting a rubber stamp and just putting it in shops, and it's basically not the best quality. But we're talking about like decent quality, certified organic stuff. Like, what do you think they're using on the farms? Do you think they're just like using they're buying in mountains of manure from slaughterhouses, or do you think they're using from sort of animal intensive livestock production farms, or do you think they're using other types of fertility in their crop
So yeah,
rotation?
that's a great question. There a lot to unpack. So when you're talking about, I'm going to talk about what they use, and then we'll talk about quality, and I'll show you a scientific way that we use to, as permaculturists or horticulturists, just people in the business, how we are going to look at mineral content and that kind of thing. Does that sound good?
Okay, cool. Yeah, go for it, man.
Perfect. So the first thing that you got to realize is, I say the biggest divide that we need to focus on is, are we talking about people like myself that grow food because I realize I eat 3 meals a day, and I'm hopefully going to be living lots and lots of years. So the quality of my food is important to me. So you're talking about the millions and millions and millions of home gardeners that produce food for themselves, or are you talking about a small group of, maybe 5,000 co-ops, for example, in the United States of America that produce food for a profit? Because when we're talking about this divide, capitalism is going to play a huge role in what you just said. Yes,
Yeah.
some people are going to want a higher quality food, but I hate to break it to you. The person that sells the food that is intended to sell is not going to be the same quality that I'm going to have. And I'm not saying that because I'm bragging. I'm just saying that because of how much effort and time I put into my own food. So when you're talking about what people like, what home gardeners do, people that care about, the green movement, so to speak, or you're talking about people that sell food, it's going to be different. So let's talk about the people that sell food.
Okay.
Even when you're talking about, like, I'm sure you're familiar with Curtis, right? Curtis Gardner, he John Kohler kind of had him on his channel. I don't know if you've seen it. Curtis the Urban Gardener, he's in Canada.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that guy. I'm familiar with John Kohler, of course, but Curtis,
So
maybe actually, has he got like an organic farm?
he does.
And he's growing like a lot of lettuce and microgreens and stuff like that.
Correct.
Yeah, I did see him. I just didn't remember what his name was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of John Kohler did like a 1.5 hour video on it, and I'm gonna compress it for your audience. So
Okay.
he grows really good, high quality food. There's no doubt about it. But how he does it, the growing practices are going to be different. Okay, so when you're talking about him, he does practice a monoculture type system, right? So he puts everything in a long line. Everything is put incrementally. There's a lot of math involved as far as, okay, I'm going to grow this amount of here, because he's looking for most yield, because he's in a small area and he has to produce the maximum amount of food possible. So yes, he's probably going to have, he's probably going to, if you're going to be doing organic, yeah, you'll be doing a lot of compost tea, hopefully a lot of compost. You're going to be using animal products. Blood meal, probably not so much on a smaller scale, because blood meal is such a low quality input. I don't know very many people personally that use it. Maybe if you bought it in a package at a store and you just like, oh, I'm going to use this, maybe. But people that do it for themselves, I don't see that every day to day, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's a very low quality input. But yeah, so as far as manures and stuff goes, yeah, it's used a lot, and everybody uses a different kind of manure. For example, there's a big difference between what your dog, excrements, and then a rabbit. A rabbit, you can put rabbit droppings directly on the plant without burning it, right? When you're talking about nitrogen, right? Nitrogen, and ammonia, you're talking about urine, so to speak. So, and that's why aquaponics with fish is so successful. So when you're looking at all these different inputs, yes, I would say for your big or medium business, they're going to be using a lot of animal products. And then the bigger the business are, you're going to see that low quality, bone blood meal that's used just to put something to cover the ground with. But for your capitalist type system, yeah, you're going to see a very intensive monocropping type type system. Now there are small few in between, bigger businesses that really do care about quality, that try to take a permaculture setting, but those systems are so rare that you don't see them day to day. What you guys are buying at the grocery store, so to speak, if you are buying at a grocery store, is going to be SoCal Farms, I guarantee it, or it's going to be a company like that, a corporation like that. So if you're listening to this and you buy your groceries at a traditional box store, you're not talking about any of the small stuff that we're talking about. Now, if you go out and you buy all your stuff from, a farmer's market, then yeah, you're probably going to start to see more of these types of manure-based systems that are going to be a higher quality. John Kohler actually used a Brix meter, BRIX. It's called a Brix meter, and it's going to look at the bionutrient availability of food, which I've always found interesting about when vegans talk about chronometers. Maybe you'll be able to explain that a little more to me. But basically what it does is it takes the juice and it's able to analyze it for sugars, fructose, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, hormones, basically any solids in there, and it's going to be able to give you a number, right? So for tomatoes, for example, 12 would be considered outstanding. 8 would be considered like above average. 6 is considered it's barely okay. Anything below 6 is pretty much like horrible quality. Yeah. So Curtis from Urban, his Urban Organic, he obviously cares. He's very labor intensive. He teaches this. He's a professional. His tomatoes off the vine were an 8. So they were above average. Someone like John Kohler's, though, is going to be 12 plus, right? Wow. And that's just because you're talking about somebody that is using the food for sale. So he is trying to produce as much as possible versus somebody like John Kohler who's growing it locally at his home. He's going to have a very higher quality content. So when we're talking about food, it's really important to realize that just because you grow food doesn't mean that one tomato is going to be the same as another tomato. Your neighbor could be growing tomatoes, and you could be doing the compost tea, making sure that your soil is rich, oxygenated, you get in the right amount of water, and you could have literally a plant that's 3 to 4 times more nutritious than his. So I've always found that confusing when you're talking about chronometers, when you're just talking about throwing a generic number to a certain given plant product and then expecting that you're going to have any kind of reasonable or statistical equivalency, I guess. Yeah. So maybe you can answer that later on. But yeah, so when you're talking about how these foods are grown, that's what we're going to use. So I encourage your viewers to go look that up. It's called Brix, BRIX, and it's how we as gardeners are able to look at the bionutrient availability of food. And it's very interesting because as you're going to see and your viewers start to look at this, you're going to see that the food content that we grow today is 1/8 the content that our great grandparents ate back in the day. And it's awesome because we're able to use technologies like refraction and things like that to really determine what our yields are. So that's kind of like the long, short way to answer the question about what big commercial agriculture will do.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, in terms of the Brix values, this is something I've known about for a while, but it's not something that people generally talk about that much in the online vegan community. And it is an incredibly important point which you just brought up. If you're just using Chronometer religiously, putting in all of your values and seeing exactly how much vitamin A, B, or whatever you're getting from the foods, well, it actually, as you just said, depends on the quality of those foods. The problem is we don't have different values for different types of like settings in which a tomato is grown. Like we can't put in organic tomato from this part of town in this season. Like obviously you can't be very specific because there's only a certain amount of values in the database. And if it's getting to the point where you have to have some value. You have to have some value in there. So that's why people generally use Chronometer, because it's better than going off nothing. So it's probably very inaccurate, but it's better than nothing. But this is why I don't recommend using Chronometer as some sort of like exact 100%. This is exactly to the decimal point what I'm getting in my diet, because there's just so much variation, especially in all foods. In all foods, there's going to be so much variation. Even in animal foods, there's going to be a big variation. Like, just get your blood test done. different people have different things in their blood. Like, so just between different people who even eat an optimal diet, you're going to get different values of different things. So even in animal foods, there's going to be different values. So yeah, going off chronometer isn't 100% accurate, but it's sort of like the best way to, in a roundabout approximate way, know if you're going to get 100 calories in the day or if you're going to get 3,000 calories in a day. So it's just sort of like a ballpark thing.
Well, I'm sure for calories, you probably are going to get a pretty accurate, I'm sure you're going to get an accurate assessment as far as calories go, I'd imagine. But as far as the nutrient density of that food, I personally, I wouldn't use I know this is probably going to upset a lot of people, but based upon the science, and I encourage them to look it up, I don't even see how they're going to get really close in an approximate ballpark as far as nutrient density goes. And that's just based upon what I can actually show people. So yeah, I'm not sure about the calories. Sure. I think calories, we're talking about calorie. All a calorie is about, the energy that something has. But as far as like nutrient density, yeah, that's something that I haven't understood, and I've tried to have people explain it to me. I think you did a pretty good job, but I personally don't think, based upon my training experience, you're going to be in a close ballpark, especially when you're talking about eating foods from, that are more nutrient dense than the other. So, but even
the calories I think are effective for the Brix score, because Brix is essentially if you've got like way more sugar in that tomato and it just tastes really sweet and it's really nice, then the sugar content is going to be higher relative to another tomato of the same size, which has a low Brix value. And the more sugar it's got, the more calories it's going to have in there too. So I think even calories are going to fluctuate between different Brix value. You could eat if you had really low quality, crappy, watery grapes that they weren't sweet at all, you could eat a whole bunch of them and not really be full. But if you got the best possible grapes and they were just so sweet and tasty, I think you would eat a lot less to satiation than you would with the crap quality grapes. Have you had any sort of experience with that? For example, have you experienced going out and just buying some grapes or some sort of fruit from the store, which is just conventional crap quality, and you've needed to have eaten more of it to get full up than the equivalent that you've grown yourself or someone you know has grown themselves? Have you ever experienced that before?
Absolutely. Great question. So you might, like I said, you might have some variance in calories. However, if you're looking about the amount of glucose and sugars that's going to be contained in a grape versus another grape, I don't see it being significantly different. Maybe to taste, sure, but in overall percentage-wise, using metric systems like grams and stuff, I don't think you'll see too much of a difference. But to answer your taste question, absolutely. So my father is from Japan. And I have a pear tree that's from Japan. And the taste of those fruit of those pears are just absolutely. You're not going to find anything in the store that's going to be able to compare it to, in my opinion. And then we have 5th generation raspberries and blueberries that I have taken from my great grandfather's his acreage, and I have them here at my home. And like I said, I'm really big into heirloom. It's just, and the reason why I am is because it's tried, true, and tested. This comes from the same family that of plants that my grandparents ate, back in the day. So yes, when it comes to the taste and when it comes to the quality of product you get, to treat plants any differently than we would any other genetic organism, I think is a big fallacy that people miss, if that makes any sense. Whether you like animals or people or whatever, you can definitely tell there is a difference between an animal that's sired, and you can tell their lineage. Just like with people, you can tell that there's a difference, and you can tell that based upon genetic code and factors. So yes, you can definitely tell a difference in how something tastes. And so with me, heirloom is big. The fruits that I grow, especially, they are heirloom, and they're heirloom for that reason, because I know the quality of product that I'm getting. I know exactly what I'm getting. I know exactly, for the most part, how it's going to yield, how it's going to behave. It's like any other organism, and to treat plants like they are different than any other organism is just scientifically, it's not accurate. You know what I mean? So how something's going to, the temperament, how it's going to behave, how it's going to behave in the soil. You do the soil the same way, you give the same amount of water, you take into account the temperature and all these different things, you're going to get a good product. And to pretend like that those aren't factors is just scientific negligence.
Yeah, sure, man. Let's bring this back to organic, because I think there's certain organic certifications which do require some permacultural practices, or like at least from like, have you heard of Demeter or Demeter?
Demeter.
Yeah, or Demeter, Demeter. It's a certification which is generally very well known in Germany and some parts of Europe, but it's also in New Zealand, in America. I'm pretty sure it's in America, and their guidelines. You have to do stuff like crop rotation. You have to do certain permacultural techniques, and if people say that organic still uses chemicals and organic still uses pesticides and organic still uses this and that, or in the Demeter guidelines, you're allowed to use these things as a final last resort type situation. So if you've got like aphids destroying your crop, then, and you can sort of prove that, then you can use certain like natural pesticides like ground up leaves and stuff like this. And if you've got some sort of horrendous, I think it's fungal infection or something in the soil, you can use a copper based is it an antifungal? I can't remember some sort of anti something or other, and it's a copper.
I mean, copper is antifungal. I mean,
yeah,
it is.
Yeah, but not only is it a last resort, and you're not allowed to do it unless you've got a legit problem which is going to destroy your crop, but also you need to have the soil. You need to do a soil measurement to make sure that you haven't over-applied it and that it doesn't linger and create problems in the long term. My camera's just gone off. I'll turn it back on in a sec for the people who are watching this. But yeah, so there's different certifications which have different levels of quality and they require different things. And so some of those certifications are actually requiring that you do a lot of permacultural stuff, like crop rotation, like using other nutrient sources and all these interesting things. And it's not just like shoveling a bunch of natural quote-unquote chemicals all over everything, just ploughing in loads of manure, monocropping it all, and just doing all like this shittest possible job just to get the product produced. It's not all like that. That might just be the standard USDA organic in the lowest quality rungs of the organic certifications. But have you got any experience with the different qualities of organic that you might get like at a farmer's market, you might get at a higher quality shop?
Sure. So, I mean, like I said, I think when you're talking about the quality, it's going to come down to kind of things I mentioned. It's going to come down to the standard in which you garden. And like I said, the reason why I think that there is a big quality difference is because, I can factually take you, if you were to come over to my house, to my property, I could factually show you, okay, this is where the soil comes from. This is how the soil is made. This is my compost tea. This is how my compost tea is made. You see that, and I have everything pretty not down to a science because I'm not a scientist, but I can show you all the inputs that I put in, why I put them in, how I put them in, and I can kind of go through that whole process. So there is going to be a good quality there versus somebody that is getting product. He's buying product from all stretches of the earth, outside the crop zone, so to speak, and he's putting these implements into his field in order to get a maximum yield. So I think some of the best quality stuff that I've seen is kind of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but instead of just using permaculture, I'll be more specific. The back to Eden type gardening, right? I do not till. I'm a no-till gardener, so to speak. I do not till. I think tilling is bad for them, is bad for the earth. There's no reason to do it. I don't plant things in nice rows. Like I said, everything that I do for purpose. I don't use any chemicals. I don't need to. I don't have an insect problem. The reason why I don't have an insect problem is because I don't want to offend any Christians or atheists or anybody here, but evolution has produced many plants that are excellent when it comes to ensuring that plants, because plants defend themselves. The idea that plants don't defend themselves is very ignorant, right? So for me, I put mint, rosemary, lavender, and I put basil, and I kind of put those on the outside, and I kind of mix everything in. Everything is mixed in permaculture. It's not just, okay, I'm just growing this one crop right here. I don't have insect problems because I use the natural environment. It goes back to those permaculture settings. I'm applying and I'm self-regulating. I'm accepting feedback from the yields that I'm getting. I'm including diversity. I'm making sure that I am observing how everything is interacting with each other. So for you're talking about how I garden versus how, the gardening or the growing is going to be for a big agriculture. Like I said, it's night and day different. So when you're talking about organic, I from what you're telling me about this Dietz thing, like that sounds good. And the reason, and here's the thing, you got to remember the reason why they put that caveat in there, no chemicals, no this, no that, is because they realize that using a monoculture setting, you're going to fail. That's why they'll do everything they can scientifically to keep it from happening. But when you're doing monoculture, you're going to see those problems. And that's why they put those caveats in there to say, okay, you can use this, you can use that as a last resort, because they realize it's going to be a problem.
Yeah. It's a problem of monocropping, right? Not of growing, or not of organic, or not of the plants themselves. It's a problem of monocropping, that you get more pests, you get more diseases, you get more fungal problems, you get more of everything going wrong when you start to monocrop and you don't use those symbiotic cropping techniques and stuff like that.
And I would say tilling is another example. The earth was not meant to be ripped apart. Our skin was not meant to be ripped apart. Like that's not what the purpose of the soil was meant to do. Now people do it, and I'm not saying that you can't, have successful harvest, but when you look at the amount of inputs you have to put in, that kind of explains my point. I like to use wood chips. I use a lot of compost tea, and everything I produce is in my crop zone. I don't go outside of my crop zone for it, because that's not how nature designed it. And the reason why I care about that is not because I'm this big earthy, save the world, go green person. It's because I believe in food sovereignty. And if I have to depend on you and the country that you produce to send me, a petrochemical element, because you can do it based upon the lax restrictions that you have in regards to chemical making, that's not very sustainable on my behalf. And I'm not saying you in general. I'm saying, getting these products from, different Middle Eastern countries, China, that kind of thing. So I believe in food sovereignty, and the only way to have food sovereignty is to be able to do it within your crop zone and being able to understand how your crop zone interacts with the environment around it. Because the crop zone that you're in, the crop zone I'm in, is going to be different, and the soils are going to be different. The amount of water we get is going to be different. The amount of sunlight we get based upon refraction of the Earth being around. I know, flat earthers, I apologize for that, but these are just scientific markers that we're using, that we have to use if we want to be most successful in our crop zone.
Yeah, man. And so the techniques that you use, some people listening to this might start be getting the feeling that you're describing some tiny little garden that you're pottering about in your own little garden, and that doesn't apply in any way, shape or form to larger scale agricultural operations. But that's just not the case, I don't think, right? Because
you are reading my mind.
the fundamental techniques and principles, and the symbiotic cropping and the no-tilling and the all the stuff that you're talking about, the compost teas, the wood chips, the mulching, and all of these agricultural practices that you're talking about can just be scaled up. It's a bit more labor intensive, but you're spending less money on chemicals, on the nutrient input sources. Like, for example, with crop rotation, when you rotate crops, you don't have to spend like as much money on the input nutrients, because the nutrients and the nutrition in the soil is there from the crop rotation, and there's so much that can be scaled up. Like, how much of this more optimal agricultural techniques that you practice, how much of that can be scaled up to a larger, higher yield, higher production capacity environment?
Correct. Okay. So, great question, and I'm glad you asked it. You were reading my mind, because I was going to want to touch on that. So I'm going to give you a quote from one of my personal heroes. His name is Bill Mollison. He has a lot of books out there. He's considered to be like one of the pioneers, one of the grandfathers of modern day permaculture. Okay. And so this is what he says. He says, the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack, who produce words and bullets, not food and shelter. So the problems that we see when it comes to food production, they are increasingly complex, but the solutions are very simple. They're actually embarrassingly simple. So when we're looking at this, okay, and you're looking at gardening, and you're looking at, can we produce all the food we need? I will give you a real world example first, and then I'll kind of break down the nuance, right? Because I realized when I give you this real world to produce a kind of a gag reflex among people, because it's going to be considered anecdotal. Okay. So the big thing that I like to talk about are the victory garden studies. The victory garden studies are talking about World War II. Okay, so during World War II, the United States of America Department of Agriculture stated that, if you want to be patriotic, start growing a garden and this and that. And that was just to take the burden off the big producers that were producing, you had these factories that were making food that were now going to be making weaponry and basically everything for war, right? So based upon the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates, they believe that around 200 million victory gardens were planted. And so in these communities, 9 to 10 million tons of food was created. So in the United States alone, in the 19th century, we were able to pretty much scale down production that big agriculture was producing to a pretty low level. And we were able to produce a lot of foods based upon, the victory gardens. Another great example of this that Michael Rupert, who's also another, rest in peace his soul, he talked about is the Cuba crisis, right? In Cuba, they had basically Cuba and North Korea are great examples of two countries that, the government controlled the means of production and they were dying. And so what the Cuban government did versus the North Korean government, the Cuban government lifted all restrictions on gardening, and they told everybody to garden anywhere you can, in a plot, in the middle of a field, any arable land you need to grow food on. And after a short, tough period, the Cuban people were eating better than they've ever eaten before. Now, I bring these examples up because these are real world examples, and there's documentaries and there's books and there's literature where you can look at this and you can see, okay, we can do it. The problem is you have very ignorant, lazy people that don't really care where their food comes from. They don't really care. As long as they can go to the grocery store and buy it, that's all that matters. Yes, can we ramp up production of food on a small scale in community-based systems and produce all the food that you'll ever need? That's not a problem, but it requires at least 10% of the population to do it. Not everybody, just 10%. Yeah. Okay, that's what it takes. It takes people actually giving it a crap about what they put in their bodies. Will that ever happen? Probably not, because people in modern day society are really lazy. And that's not a hit on them. Great. I mean, people care more about social media and Facebook and everything else and what's going on in the world, and they care about what they're putting in their body, 3 times, 4 times a day. So can you do this? Yes. If you have a lawn, or there's a lawn nearby, that is green space that's not being used except for to showcase. I have no idea. You know what I mean? Especially the crabgrass that's grown. Like, even if you wanted to have a lawn, if you were just to change the type of grass that you grew, you could reduce global warming. You could reduce CO2 emissions by 400 to 500% just based upon the seed that's being grown there. People don't realize this. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like pasture grass, depending on what types of perennial seeds you use, I mean, you're talking about 500% more decrease in greenhouse gases just based upon the pasture that's there. And you can mow it. And the more you mow it, the more CO2 it takes out of the atmosphere. Isn't that crazy? Wow. So people can take these green spaces, even if you don't want to garden, and if you were to change just the grass seed that grew in there, you could do a lot. So this idea that there's not enough food, that not enough food that can be grown is ridiculous. So that's the anecdotal portion. Obviously, I consider it anecdotal because it's based upon experiences that people have had. But you can look that up. The Victory Garden in World War II. You can look at the Cuba famine crisis that happened, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So these are all things that we can factually look at. But as far as the real science goes, I mean, I think this, when you're talking about like what I have everything from your traditional garden, like in the ground, right? I have raised beds. I have aquaponics. I do so many different types of gardening. And yes, I can produce a ton of food on a small plot of land. I just moved to a bigger acreage. But before, when I was living in a city, like an urban area, I was on 1/3 of an acre, and I was growing all sorts of stuff. So you can do it. And if you have the right seeds, like the way I had mine down, Pat, where there was plants that I was growing that were not supposed to be growing. So you have perennials, you have annuals. Like I had annuals that were coming back every year, and that's because I was using old-fashioned heirloom seeds that had been modified to where they don't produce seed, right? So when you include these systems in and you buy a good heirloom, not saying you have to, but if you get a good heirloom seed that produces a flower that produces a lot of seeds because that's how it was supposed to be designed versus some of the new Franken seeds that we have that either don't produce seeds at all or they don't produce a lot of seeds because they're too busy trying to produce more sugary types of fruits. You're going to be able to get a system set up where it's going to take care of itself for the most part. Yeah, there's still some work that goes into it. I'm not going to lie to you and say that there isn't. But if you look at how you set it up, it's very doable on a small scale. I will say though, and I will say though, on a big scale, I don't think it's going to happen. And I can give you my reasons why. But on a big scale, I don't ever see it happening.
Cool. Yeah, because you're sort of thinking about this optimal style of growing for the maximum nutrient quality, and like John Kohler does and like you do yourself, to really get the top quality soil to produce the top quality produce from the nutrients in the soil, and really making sure that the nutrition in the soil is absolutely optimal. But I mean, just take medium-scale organic agriculture, for example. There are farms who are applying symbiotic cropping techniques, and they are trying no-till. There's even huge farmers doing no-till. There are quite a lot of these techniques being used in larger agricultural situations, and especially in the organic industry. Because when you buy organic, you are that's sort of the point, is that it's supposed to at least be better quality in some way, and it's supposed to have less chemicals. It's supposed to be produced to a higher standard. That's why it's more expensive, because it's supposed to be better quality. I know that many of this, the entry level, shall I say, certifications don't really necessitate the best possible quality. But when you do buy a decent certification of organic produce, a lot of these farms are using some of these permacultural techniques already. They're not using them in the optimal way that you're envisioning, but do you think there's some sort of gradient between just shit quality mono agriculture and a bit more of an ideal setting? There, we can sort of draw a line between Monsanto style bullshit and what's happening in your garden. And although we won't reach your garden in terms of the nutrition on a very large scale, we can go in the direction and use a lot of those techniques. Have you got any experience or heard anything or know anything about medium size or even larger scale farmers using some of these permacultural techniques?
Yeah, so I do know people that for a living they farm, and talking with them and knowing them, on an intimate level, good friends of mine, I'd say yes, they do that. And maybe this is just coming from my bias, and I can admit my bias. I know them. I know how they work. I know, and they literally pour their blood and heart out into what they do. And yes, I would say they produce some good quality plant products. That's non sequitur. I totally agree with you. Now, to be able to make it into the production in which you're going to be able to buy at a store, at a box store, I'm just saying it's not going to happen. And the reason why it's not going to happen is because you're talking about changing not only farm industries, but you're talking about changing how money works, period. You're talking about changing a whole big agricultural complex in regard to farm subsidies. Take the United States of America, for example. Trump just introduced 16 billion new farmer bailouts in the U.S. Right now, in the United States of America, we subsidize big plant agriculture more than we subsidize oil. Okay. The EU is the same way. There's a lot of subsidies. And the government can tell the farmers what they want to grow. You can artificially, just like they've done with eggs and milk and cheese in the past, they do the same thing with crops. So these smaller, medium-sized farmers aren't going to be able to compete with that. And that's the reason why the prices are so expensive, is because you see a lot of this offset with subsidies, which is 100% reality. And then you're seeing the problems with what people are wanting, where you can get it cheaper, because you're talking about when you're buying food outside of your crop zone, you're talking about international politics on a whole nother level. You're talking about, well, China can produce this strawberry way cheaper than the guy that lives 100 miles away. Well, why is that? Because of subsidies, because of the cost of shipping, because of the already factored subsidies that have been grandfathered in. So you're looking at all these different attributes. And yes, you can get great practices, people that don't use child slavery in big plant agriculture, because a lot of people don't realize this. 70% of all child labor is in plant agriculture.
Really?
You're looking at all the pesticides. Yeah, you're looking, and that's coming directly from the UN. So a lot of these things are happening, and there are good farmers out there. God, there's some amazing farmers out there, but their clientele is within their crop zone. Does that make sense? Like these good farmers that I know out in my county, they are to the local, because I live really rustic out here, so everything's going to the local communities, right? These farmers you're not going to be able to get this guy's bok choy where you're at or in the next state over. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Everything is staying localized, which is how it should be. So if you could get people to change how they look at food, yeah, you're going to be able to, these medium-sized farmers are going to be able to do a lot more. When you're talking about just flat out subsidies and the permitting every year is required just to grow food and zoning and all these different things that you're looking at, there's so many more parameters into which the food gets on the shelves. That's not just, growing it is a small percentage of it. People can grow some damn good food, but it's all the other factors that you're going to have to overcome. And so that's why I don't see it happening on a big scale. If you're thinking that one day you're going to be able to go into your store and you're going to be able to go into the box store and say, you know what, was this an aquaponics grown food, or was this food like, I don't think you're going to be able, I mean, you might, I don't think you're going to be able to see that big. I don't think you're going to see that happening, because you have to, where are these big farmers going to go? These people are getting, I mean, if government took subsidies out of food, I mean, the prices for produce would skyrocket. I mean, and even for animal products, particularly would skyrocket like crazy, right? So
I guess we've brought up an interesting question. When you say that it can't be done on a large scale, and when you go into your regular supermarket, it's never going to happen that you walk in there and you're going to have the quality of product that you're talking about. But
right.
But there is like some gradient, right? It's not like black and white. There's not sort of just like the lowest quality shit versus the stuff that you grow or John Kohler grows. There is some in between. There's some moving towards or using some of the permacultural techniques which you use yourself, but maybe not as so labor intensive. For example, I saw one very, very large scale farm that was using symbiotic cropping. So it was basically, it wasn't a monocrop cropping setting. It was, for lack of a better word, like a stereo cropping or something, because there was like they were doing symbiotic cropping on a huge scale with two crops. So they had sunflower and corn, if I remember correctly. So there were, because the insects wanted to eat the sunflowers, so they did like a line of sunflowers, and then they did like a huge load of corn, and then they would do like more sunflowers, and so that the sunflowers would get attacked and eaten by all of the pest animals, and the corn was left alone, and it like worked like really well, and that was like a quite large scale farm. So there are sort of some of these techniques that you're using. You can scale some of these techniques up, because I've literally seen some of them being used. So I think the question is, like, can we just like go in this direction more? And because there are farms, and you can buy food in shops that has been produced using crop rotation, using symbiotic cropping, using mulching, and using some of these other techniques, especially in Germany. In Germany, at my local organic shop, you can actually do day trips to the farms and see how they're growing the foods. And there are a lot of like local farm suppliers and stuff, especially in Poland, where I was living in Berlin. It's not that far until the west side of Poland. So, and that's where a lot of the farms were. It's essentially local. It's just a couple of 100 kilometers. And a lot of these farms are using some of those techniques on the sort of higher end, the higher end of the organic retail sector. So it's just interesting to understand the gradients and the difference between buying conventional, buying the poorest quality organic, and then buying a higher quality organic product.
Sure, and that's a great point. Do I think that there are places that produce good quality food? Like I said, I'm not denying. I definitely do. But when I unfortunately, when I look at this, I don't look at this on this guy's doing it good, this guy's not doing it. I look at it based upon the facts I have in front of me. Donald Davis, he's a researcher for University of Texas. He does chemistry and biochemistry for that university. He did a landmark study in 2004 with the Journal of American College of Nutrition, and they found that when they look at reliable declines of the amount of protein, calcium, phosphorus, B2, vitamin C, and they looked over just in 50 years, the last 50 years, and they contributed these huge losses. I mean, we're talking like vitamin C content having 1/8 the nutrient yield as it did 50 years in the past. And you can go look at that study. It's a great study. And when you're looking at the practices of fossil fuels and labor intensive for fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, when you're looking at that, you're seeing a huge decline. So, and that has to do with not only practices, but you have to ask yourself too, what are the plants that are being used? Are we talking like where are these farms using heirloom seeds that have been, tried, proven, tested, or these seeds have been modified to produce a bigger fruit? Like I said, you give me an heirloom seed and you give me a GMO seed, and we put it in the same soil, you're going to get a different outcome. You're going to get a different result. Even based upon nutrient availability. The nutrient availability is in the soil, but how that plant takes in that soil and what that plant does, you know what I mean, is going to be different because they're two different organisms. You know what I mean? They're genetically different. It's like getting you can have two different breeds of dogs, right? Like take pit bulls, for example. I love pit bulls, but you can have one pit bull that's been heavily bred to look a certain way, and then you have the traditional pit bull of, the British traditional pit bull. They're going to look totally different. You know what I mean? And then you have the American Staffordshire Terrier, which is considered another subset of that. You know what I mean? And you're going to get a totally different organism altogether. So when I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at what the science is telling me, and I'm looking at, how much our food has already declined, all I'm saying is we're behind the power curve. I don't think anyone will deny that. Now, is it possible that one day we can figure this out? Well, we know how to figure it out. It's just I don't understand. I don't know how capitalism, I guess, is going to figure it out. Just like for veganism, I feel like the big push in veganism and vegan activists is, we'll just let capitalism fix it for you. Yeah, you're getting some cool products, but I don't see it being fixed on. I don't see capitalism being able to get you there quick enough. Just like with the same thing with how I look at food. Yeah, capitalism is great, and I'm glad that I can use capitalism to, produce the systems that I have and being able to make my own aquaponic system and stuff. Like capitalism helps me with that, but as far as me if I didn't do it this way, I wouldn't be able to eat this way. The only reason why I can eat this way is because I do it myself. Now, if you're thinking that there's going to be a box store one day in your lifetime or my lifetime, we'll be able to go to the box store and they'll be able to just have this problem fixed because somebody else will fix it. I'm not that kind of person. I guess my mentality doesn't allow me to see the hope in that because I don't see it happening. The science is showing us through the last 50 years that the bioavailability of food is going down. That's just the truth. And I don't see that trend rapidly spiking. I mean, when you're talking about 1/8, that's huge. And another thing people don't realize is transportation. Some greens, right, oxalate type plants, a lot of them can lose a third of their nutritional value just after being harvested within 72 to 96 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about like just look at that. Like, let's say your average person that's watching this, they're going to the store to buy bok choy, spinach, or whatever. They're buying some leafy greens that was already grown in substandard practices. Okay, so let's say I'm just being really nice, and let's say they got some extra spray of chemicals, right? So let's say it has 1/3 the nutritional quality that our grandparents ate, and then let's say this was grown in Costa Rica, or it was grown in some country, and it was shipped to EU or to the United States, and it took 48 hours to get there, and then they got it within 72 hours, and they put it in the refrigerator, and then they ate it a couple days later. You're talking about that food product quality, if we were to compare it to somebody that just grabbed it out of their garden, you're talking about a nutritional deficit of over 800%.
Okay.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's just using the science. That's using the science of what it's grown in, the time it takes in order for that food to finally be consumed. And that's not even talking about the environmental impacts. And I'm not saying that you can't buy stuff at the grocery store. I'm saying that you're right. We should be able to figure out a solution. I just don't see what the solution is because we're already at a deficit.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting. I feel like we've got two conversations happening. We've sort of forked into two conversations. On one hand, we've got the conversation which I was originally interested in terms of the live debate I did with Will and the organic is carnage thing. So on one hand, we've got the if I go and buy organic food, is that less vegan than buying conventional? And then the second conversation we're starting to have now, which is also a very interesting conversation, I'm glad we're having it, but it is a separate conversation, is the food quality at the store. And I think you've hit a really interesting point about, for example, just the transportation, whether it's conventional, whether it's pesticide-laden GMO Monsanto material, whether it's the highest quality organic. If you're getting it like and you're consuming it a week after it's been picked, then it's going to have less vitamins. The minerals don't go anywhere because minerals don't just evaporate, but the vitamins break down. And this is something that, for example, Dr. Gregory has talked about. The vitamin bioavailability does fall over time, and certain crops do better in the fridge, certain crops do better when you don't put them in the fridge. And there's really interesting research actually on the quality of the vitamin and the phytonutrient and the all the enzymes and all the other stuff in the food, all the phytonutrients, the polyphenols, all of those. I'm pretty sure the polyphenols as well as the vitamins just decline over time. And so that's a really interesting point. But the thing is, it's almost like that's just an issue of buying your food from a store. So we've got two separate conversations. We've got a conversation about food quality, and we've got a conversation about how vegan the food is. And they're both very interesting. Let me try and sort of...
I see what I did. I'll answer your question very, very, very honestly. Is organic Carnist? Absolutely not. More animals will be killed. More environments destroyed using conventional methods versus using an organic type, just with an organic type mentality. So yes, I mean, if you're talking about conventional farming kills more animals than I think Carnist do, to be 110% honest with you, because in U.S. alone, you have over 70 million birds that die every single year alone in the U.S. because of pesticides. If you're looking about the oil intensity it takes to frack, especially the Canadian tar sands, Gawars in Saudi Arabia. If you're looking at the environmental impacts they've had on climate change, the environmental impacts they've had on the world, if you're talking about diotoxins that are produced in regards to mercury in the water, this is all can be contributed to a big overhaul of our petrochemical system, in which we douse everything with oil. Every product that's packaged in plastic in regards to plant products, conventionally, you have 10 calories of 10 kilocalories of oil for every calorie of food that's produced here in the United States of America. So yes, conventional farming is not animal friendly. Conventional farming kills animals, and if you care about animals, you care about animal rights, you can't support conventional farming. I mean, that's just me putting it packaged really nice for you. And anybody that says otherwise is ridiculous. Now, There are ways using permaculture where you can implement. I mean, animals are here. You got to figure out how to live with them. And I think permaculture and horticulture does a great job of using animals in a way that doesn't kill them. Free grazing animals, people free graze chickens, some of the best veganic gardens that I've been to. There's not a whole lot of them, but all of them use animals in some aspects. They don't eat the chickens, but chickens are really good at pecking. They're really good at laying manure down. Same with rabbits. They're really good at including these animals in the ecosystem that can produce, a good quality product. So conventional farming kills animals. If you have an organic mind to it, you realize that you can use and you can do things in a way that's most beneficial to the environment.
Yeah, sure. And you've touched on a really important point there as well. Like that was a really good, sort of like in a nutshell. If you're confused about organic and conventional, that was really interesting to hear your perspective on that. A lot of people were going to argue about that, and that's a really contentious point. But I think what it's safe to say at this point is, with your point of view being such strong in the other direction to someone like Will, who I was having the conversation with, or a disappearing doctor, or Vegan Gains, or Ask Yourself, or any of these people, or Banana Warrior Princess, or any of these people who are saying that organic is carnist and kills more animals, or contributes to more financially to the animal agriculture industries. And like your opinion really contrasted that very starkly. So I think like even if you just to take a point in saying, okay, well, I don't know who to listen to now, I think it's safe to say that we can at least say that it's not so clean cut as some of these people are saying that organic is Carnist. Like, it's definitely more to the picture, and it's so complex, and you can't just say that. So that I think to err on the safest side in the world, we would say we don't know, but to actually look at it a bit more, I was coming to the same conclusion as what you just said, that the pesticides are killing a lot of birds and a lot of the wildlife, and a lot of the ecosystem is suffering, and the soil degradation and the waterways and the a lot of
the people that are working on it. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if you realize this, but like I said, 70% of all child labor is in plant agriculture. Take it out of it. Roundup is just paid out millions and millions of dollars, because now we know that in case you didn't know, pesticides are a level 1 carcinogen, and they do cause cancer. And now we have people that are dying of cancer, and there's lots of, just this last year, there have been numerous lawsuits. So, but if there's one point I can make that just to help prove this point, okay, I kind of misspoke a little bit, not really, but when we're talking about farming, I'm going to give you a great example. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with aquaponics, but right now aquaponics is literally saving lots of cities and towns in Africa. Okay. Aquaponics uses 95% less water. I have an aquaponics system and I love it. It uses 95% less water than traditional farming, and it uses no pesticides, no fertilizers, nothing like that. It uses aqualife. It uses fish, tilapia, trout, catfish. It uses fish waste, and it grows food, because the fish waste is then put into a media, which can be clay pebbles, or it can be clay. I've seen clay pebbles, marbles, moss, even gravel, that kind of stuff, and it grows plants. And if you look at that, like, yes, there are animals that are used. The animals aren't. You don't have to eat the fish. The animals aren't being killed, but you're giving them a safe, clean environment. You're creating waste, and that's what you have. And what they're using the fish, they're using local fish, and they're actually able to reintroduce these fish back into the environment, back into the streams, back into the rivers, and what have you. So if that's not an example of farming at its best, to which it's not using any chemicals, it's 100% organic, certified, and you're able to give back to the environment, how can you show me a better picture of human involvement in food? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you just Google it,
I've got 2 points from that. So the first point is that vegans don't necessarily want to exclude animals from the growing ecosystem. Veganism doesn't mean exclude animals. Veganism doesn't mean against animals or no animals. We can't have animals involved in any process of food production. That's not what veganism is. Veganism is about not exploiting animals for our personal benefit at the detriment to the animals. So if we want to stab them and eat them, then we're exploiting them for our personal benefit at their detriment. But if we want to just introduce or make the ecosystem more versatile, more more vibrant with wildlife, and we're reintroducing wildlife, and we're increasing the biological diversity of an ecosystem, and we are growing food within the context of an ecosystem. No one who's a sensible vegan is against growing food in the context of an ecosystem. Like, we don't have to produce food in isolation from animals. We can produce food with animals, but we just don't exploit those animals to their detriment and our personal benefit. So having a harmonious system, which is what an ecosystem actually is, having a healthy ecosystem, I don't think any sensible vegans are going to be against that in any way. And
not the ones I've talked to, but I agree with you. I think that aquaponics is really what vegans should be talking about, because you can take species that are already endangered and you can create more of them and you can reintroduce them back. No one says you have to eat them. You know what I mean? But you convince Mick the vegan of that, and I'll give you an award.
Well, if it's like sort of farming, for example, recently I saw an article where they're farming salmon in Norway, and because of these natural algae blooms which happened on the surface of the lake or something, normally the fish just simply swim away because they see the algae, they can't breathe, it suffocates them because it gets on their gills, so they just swim away. But when they're farmed, they're in these sort of like nets and they can't go anywhere, which is terrible because salmons normally swim really far and upstream and stuff like this. So it's terrible to begin with. But recently, it happened very recently, in fact. It was just like an innumerable amount of salmon died because they suffocated to death because all of this algae came in and just suffocated them and they couldn't swim away because they were contained in these net prisons. And so if it is entailing something like that where we're imprisoning the animals in an unnatural way, then I wouldn't be in support of that. But if it was literally just like, oh, we're going to reintroduce biodiversity into this stream because the stream has been fucked up from pollution or from like sort of man-made intervention, we're just going to reintroduce biodiversity here and we're going to have a symbiotic relationship with the ecosystem, I've got nothing wrong with that. And I don't think Mike the Vegan would have anything wrong with that. And if he does, then I'd like to have a talk with him about that. But I think maybe there's different sort of things. If we're just gonna enslave animals and use them as machines to produce our food, then both me and Mike the Vegan wouldn't be on board with that. But if we're gonna sort of just increase the biodiversity of an ecosystem and work with the ecosystem, I have no reason to believe that.
Yeah. So with aquaponics, like I said, I don't want to. I mean, I guess you technically are enslaving them because you need their poop. Right. So if I'm just being very blunt, you have them in like, for example, mine, I have channel catfish. They're in a big aquarium. So they'll just say aquarium, but there's this big area in which they can live, you can feed. And when they make messes, the more messes they make, they're great because you suck that mess up. You put that mess into a grow bed that has plants and that feeds the plants and then water comes directly back. It's impossible to kill them because there's not enough. They're always going to have tons of oxygen. Their water is always going to be clean because you want to get that garbage, the gunk, the dirtiness out as quickly as possible because that's high quality plant fertilizer. And then the catfish do what catfish do. They're going to mate. They're going to reproduce. So what you do with those catfish, you could definitely use for a very good environmental, purpose. You know what I mean? Or you can use it to feed yourself or what have you, which I know vegans would be against that. But you can make a system like that where you can actually do good. You can reintroduce these fish into populations where they have been quote, gentrified from because of human interaction and stuff like that. But the abilities are there. You know what I mean? It's just the purposes that you use to take care of them.
Going back to the enslavement point.
For a good purpose.
Going back to the enslavement point, that's quite an interesting point because you have them in some sort of like tank or whatever, but you don't have to do that. From what I understand about this process, you can use lakes, right?
Technically you could. I don't think you'd get the quality though because you want a concentrated fish waste on your plant media. That's what you want. You want a concentrated fish. Like I want that fish waste directly on my plants, just like I would for any other fertilizer, compost tea, etc. You can have it in a big lake, but it's going to be really watered down, and I don't think you're going to get the nutrient quality that you're going to get from. You want waste directly on plants. That's how you do it.
I was hearing about someone was mentioning an agricultural technique which was using like a lake as a basis. Like they were literally growing. I think it was even carrots. It sounds bizarre, but they were literally like growing carrots in a lake. I need to look into it more.
You can grow carrots on aquaponics pretty well. You can probably grow it that way, but if you're looking for overall quality and you're like for me, like I said, I want the highest quality. I want something that's sustainable. I want to stay away from them because when you talk about aquaponics, everyone says, "Oh, fish, it has mercury and this and that." Yeah. When you get it wild caught, it's going to have those dioxins that are released from the environment. In an aquaponics closed loop system, those problems go away instantly. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. You gotta take the good with the bad, so to speak. But if you're talking about an ability to grow food using fish, even let's say that the fish are enslaved, which is horrible, right? Horrible enslaved fish master over here. But if you're able to do it and you're able to grow the same amount of food at a higher quality product, you're able to grow a bunch of them because you can. The production is way better than conventional farming. Using 95% less water, you're not killing the fish. You need them alive. You want them to grow. You want them to make messes. And you just so happen to, whenever they breed, okay, cool, we're going to introduce these fish into X, Y, and Z, habitat. I mean, what's the problem?
Yeah, sure. I think the problem.
Comparison.
I think the problem for vegans would be having them confined to a tank. That's the big thing. If it was done in a lake setting, I don't think any vegans would be against that. I think having some sort of tank is the problematic bit. But like,
well, I agree with you. But then I asked that same vegan where they get their food, and then guess what? It's like, well, you're kind of a hypocrite. You know what I mean? So I mean, if they're already going to voluntarily be in the system in which they're supporting the death of animals, whether it's through conventional farming or through an organic co-op that uses manures from dead animals or bone meal. Like, if you got to pick, I mean, are vegans open to picking the less of two evils if they're already voluntarily being in a system that supports some kind of animal, atrocities? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but this is the thing. There's other ways of getting fertility into your soil, right? So you don't necessarily need to use a huge amount of manure, or you might not need to use more manure than conventional, because I know conventional use a lot of manure as well. And a lot of blood meal, feather meal, fish meal. So
no, I get what you're saying. I guess, and this is coming from somebody who's obviously not vegan. I guess my biggest concern is, yes, there are ways we can do things better. But if a vegan right now in modern day 2019 that's buying his food at a box store or whatever is really going to honestly say, well, I'm kind of against aquaponics because they're in a tank. Like, that's the kind of mentality which I will have to say is why we're never going to get to the point where we're going to be able to have good subsistence changes. You know what I mean? I mean, You get what I'm saying? Like, I agree with you. I want food to be better. And I don't, like I said, I want big animal agriculture to go away tomorrow. I want big plant agriculture to go away tomorrow, But if we are going to take steps in that direction, if I were to say, well, hey, in Africa, they're doing this right now. You can get rid of all you can get rid of all, animal enslavement when it comes to food production, except for fish in an aquarium. And it's going to use 95% less water, no pesticides, no none of this, none of that. And you're going to have a vegan say, well, no, that's not ethical, but I'm going to keep going to the health food store and buy this. Then it's like, how are we going to make a change for the better? I guess is my question.
But
like I said,
yeah, let's think about a scenario. So we've got scenario A, which is using fishes in a tank, and then scenario B, where you're getting it from a local farm through your local health food store, which sources from a local farm, which is growing using compost, worm castings, mulching, symbiotic cropping, crop rotation, stuff like that. And it's not using much manure or maybe not any manure at all. And obviously the better one would be the one that's using the permacultural techniques and not the fish tank idea, right? That would be optimal, right?
I'd say I'm not. I guess you'd have to look at quality of everything. I mean, if you're talking about they're getting manure, where are they getting their manure from? Are they following a rabbit around and picking it up one by one, or are they buying it from a place where manure is gathered because people have animals that are in cages, or you know what I mean? Like, when you talk about manure, show me one company that gets manure from a place where animals are,
but hold on,
just really walking around grabbing them, like, you know what I mean?
Are you saying that you 100% need manure though? Because you don't need manure to grow crops. You can get the fertility in different ways, right? You can use all sorts of things. You can use like seaweed. You can use the compost teas, the fungal infusions in the compost, and you've got all sorts of stuff that you can use, right? You don't necessarily even need to use manure in the first place, right?
Sure, yeah. And if you're able to grab all that, like I said, permaculture looks at big picture. If you're able to get all that stuff that you need locally, then yeah, man, go about it. But the second you go outside a crop zone and the second you have to introduce transportation, you have to take those costs into consideration. The second you have to talk about labor intensive, transportation from one country to another, the second you have to talk about packaging costs and all this stuff, you're talking about including a lot of other detriments to what it is that you're trying to do. So, I mean, if you're talking about if we look at where most of the food is grown in the United States of America, I'm sure you've heard like the bread belt, the rust belt, all this stuff. That's in the central part of the United States. Seaweed is great. I have access to tons of seaweed literally down the street because I'm on the coast.
Yeah.
I have access to more of it than that. But that guy, if you're going to tell that guy, oh, well, I know you have a lot of, there's a lot of manure around, but, you got to use the seaweed from the West Coast or East Coast. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's great and all. And yes, you can. But when you're looking at the overall environmental impact, you have to look at all inputs. And that's how permaculturists look at things. I have to take all inputs into consideration. Now, like I said, if the idea really is, as far as aquaponics goes, that, hey, aquaponics, I'm not in favor with this whole fish in captivity thing. I totally get it. And here's the thing, I'm not here to change your mind either way. I totally get it, but it's that kind of mentality that I feel isn't progressing because those people aren't getting their food from a lesser of evil sense. You know what I mean? Like in modern day reality, that's kind of where we're at. So I like this idea of, can we do something better? Yes. But if we're going to play into this capitalistic system, well, there's going to be steps that we're going to have to take. And I think if you take that next, hey, I know it's horrible that fish are in aquariums. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. But if we can get this established and then look at making it better, then I'd say that's a way better step than, well, I'm totally rejecting the idea of that because I don't like it, but I'm still going to buy my food at a box store. I'm still going to do this and do that. And I think it's great. We should have more farms like the ones you're talking about that can do everything veganically. Like I said, I've seen a few, there's not a whole lot of them, but I've seen a few veganic farms, and they do a great job. They do a really good job with, using like what I do, the back to Eden method, where you're talking about wood chips and stuff like that. And they do use veganic compost tea. And the only deaths that you really are occurring if they're not using, if they're doing everything by hand is just some insects, who really, I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but, insects die. That's their purpose they have a very specific purpose, in life. But yeah, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. However, that's not what the majority of industry is. And so if we're talking about doing things either your way, which is doing it yourself, which most people aren't going to do, then we have to look at what are some of the big business type opportunities. And I just don't see organic gardening taking off into a position where it's going to be big enough to compete with, like I said, compete with these subsidies, compete with production of what it needs to. I just haven't seen it. It's a great idea, but we have a lot of soil restoration to do. Because even if we wanted to take these big farmlands that already have been, for 60 years now, been laying down chemicals, you know how long it's going to take just to get that soil to where it can grow naturally again? It's going to take a hot second to restore soil. Soil is not something that can just be restored overnight. So I think these are things that are great. And that's the thing. I applaud you so much because, you're the only person I've seen on YouTube talking about this. Yeah. You're the only one. You're the only one that's not afraid to kind of go against the status quo, because there's a lot of people that disagree. There's a lot of people that think that, eating organic is somehow like the biggest evil next to, I don't know, whatever his name is, that the carnivore doctor guy, you know what I mean? Like
Sean Baker.
Yeah, I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like,
well, I'd say that I'm probably one of the few people talking about it in the vegan online community. I think in the general community outside of the vegan community, obviously there's people talking about, like yourself. You got John Cola is obviously talking about a lot of this stuff, who's also sort of part of the vegan movement as well. But I don't know how much of it he talks about on his vegan channel. He talks a lot about it. I think the biggest, because I know a lot of there's a lot of vegetarian gardeners out there. There's a lot of there's a couple vegan gardeners, not a whole lot, but it's definitely something that's talked about. But the way John looks at it, and the way a lot of us look at it in the permaculture movement, it's less about the diet, and it's more of, what are you doing every day? You know what I mean? Like, how are you making the environment a better place? I did something with John Kohler and the guy from Boogie Brew, Nick from Boogie Brew, and they was talking about trying to get pesticides
out of use by the government for spraying for Los Angeles County. So that was something that, I jumped on, and, I called people, I wrote letters and stuff like that. Like, that's what we should really be. That's what I think, as a community that's supposed to care about animals and care about the environment, that's what we should be doing. We should be working with other people. And, I worked with them on that, and that was great, to be able to get chemicals out of, Los Angeles County transportation department that spraying the streets. In Florida, for example, I don't know if you know this, but the Supreme Court of Florida has ruled that they're not going to involve themselves with home gardeners. There's a home gardener that sued a county in Miami, or a township of Miami, because Miami said that you're not allowed to have a garden.
Okay.
City ordinance. And the Florida State Supreme Court said, we're not going to get involved. We think that the city has every right to say you can't garden. So these are things that are actively happening every day all over the world. And that's where I think we should be focusing on if we really want to, attain this animal rights, green, very sustainable, mindset. And I feel like that's where a lot of us are. We care. I mean, diet's important, and it is important, but sustainability, food sovereignty, I mean, those are kind of the things. And that's why John does what he does, because he realizes that he eats every day, and he was battling cancer and a bunch of stuff. I don't know if you know his story at all, but, that saved his life, growing his own food.
Oh yeah. Like ages ago, like before he came to raw foods and stuff and home gardening, he got cancer. Yeah. I thought you meant more recently or something, but no, that's his backstory.
Raw foods is great. I think that fermented vegetables. I mean, I eat a lot of fermented vegetables, and I think if we're going to talk about nutrient bioavailability and stuff, I think that's really important to look at, not just the foods and what we're eating, but, how we're preparing them. Like me, I love fermented foods. I eat a ton of fermented foods. And I think the science for fermented foods is very sound, and it's there.
Yeah.
So I think people just need to be overall just more aware of, how they interact with the environment around them. But I have to say, like I said, I applaud you deeply, because you're the only person I know in the community right now that's even trying to talk about this. And it takes a lot of courage, because I know a lot of people have things to say about you. I feel like you get attacked by the vegans now and the Carnists.
Yeah.
How do you?
I don't know. I think some people like me, some people hate me. I think the main portion of the vegan community that doesn't like me is evolving around one YouTuber called Ask Yourself, because he's got some sort of social issues, and I seem to have gotten his nerves, and it spiraled out of control, and there was a lot of public beef, and then so a lot of his followers don't like me. But apart from that, I don't think I'm friendly with most other people. It's just sort of like that sort of section of the geeky Discord vegan area. Is
the name your trait guy?
Yeah, the name the trait guy. Yeah, it's basically.
That's all I'm by. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he's a really smart guy, but he's very quick to block people and sort of like be very rude and be like call people retards and call people morons and stuff. But yeah, so that side of the vegan community doesn't like me because he doesn't like me. But apart from that, I think I'm cool with most people. The carnivores, I like some of the carnivores, like for example Tristan from Primal Edge Health. Like, I had a really nice conversation with him. I don't agree with what he says a lot of the time. I think almost like every other sentence which emerges from his mouth, I would want to counter with evidence or something else. So I've got a lot of disagreements with these people. But even people like Sverige, for example, like I was emailing him right now for a live debate, and a lot of these people are friendly. I wouldn't say that I've got any enemies or anything. Even amongst carnivores, I think we have a lot of disagreements. I don't think we have a lot of hate. It's more of sort of a disagreement type thing at this stage. But I wanted to sort of paint a picture of, after we've been talking for a while now, and we've been discussing a lot of very interesting stuff in terms of organic, in terms of food quality, in terms of production scales, in terms of food sovereignty, in terms of permacultural techniques, a lot of interesting stuff. So I want to start painting a bit of a picture, right? So
yes,
what the carnivores like to do is create a false equivalency fallacy. So what they do is they compare this idyllic cow roaming around in an acre of land on a field. So this one cow feeds the entire family for a year, and it's on a green, grassy field, and it's so idyllic. And this sort of like the best case scenario of a meat eater. compared to monocrop GMO Monsanto agriculture and a vegan buying this with like 1,000 miles, 1,000 food miles for their loaf of bread, and so many animals were killed in the process. And they're sort of comparing the two like they're equivalent when they're completely not equivalent. If you want to compare equivalents, if you're going to compare a happy cow in a field which lives to a ripe old age and then gets killed and the family eat it and it lasts a year or something, if you want to compare that, then you have to compare to the very type of plant agriculture we've been discussing in this live stream, where you're producing it yourself in your garden or on your own land, and you're doing the highest quality stuff that you can possibly do to make the food nutritious and the best quality produce. So you can compare those two things, sure, but then if you're comparing that, one cow's getting killed and no animals are getting killed in the permacultural sort of plant setting. So it's sort of like in that situation, there's less death from the plants. And in the situation of GMO Monsanto horror show, vegan loaf of bread, well, then you're comparing that. The proper equivalency would be factory farming, industrial factory farming, and those animals are getting fed those same GMO horror crops. So there's even more deaths in that. So if we're comparing vegan to sort of carnivore or something, well, there's less death involved in both cases of the correctly sort of like compared scenarios. But now if we want to compare conventional to organic, we can't compare sort of just like conventional at your grocery store with the highest quality possible organic imaginable. We have to compare equivalents here as well. So within the vegan paradigm or within the plant paradigm, we've got low quality conventional at your local store and low quality organic at your local store. And the low quality organic, would you say that is better than the low quality conventional? You think so, right?
So you unpackaged a lot there, and you are a brave man. I will tell you that. I have never, I'll be honest, never in my life would I ever think that a vegan would have said what you just said. And I agree with, I agree with a lot of what you just said. And so I'm kind of impressed. Yeah, wow. So I would say, using facts, reasoning, logic, and all that stuff, I would say low quality organic is way better than conventional, just period. Even low quality organic versus maybe a high quality convention, just because of the fact that, and I hear this a lot, and this is something that I've heard with in the vegan community. And so if I'm wrong, just correct me, but we're always talking about meat and being a carcinogen, red meat, all this stuff, processed meats, a level 2 carcinogen, and all this other stuff. Well, we factually know without any equivocation, right, that pesticides, based upon that website that they provide themselves, are a number 1 class 1 carcinogen. It is not a probable carcinogen. It is a carcinogen. So when you're putting that in your body, you are putting a known carcinogen in your body. So I would go with, if I had to choose between, and this is just me, and this is my personal preference. If it was sprayed, I don't eat it. You know how some vegans, and I'm sure you're the same way, you look at a piece of meat, you're like, how could I eat that? There's no way I could eat that.
Yeah.
That's how I am with pesticides and chemicals.
Yeah,
man.
you just see it as non-food.
I can't do it. You know what I mean? And that's just because I've seen, no joke, I've seen them when they're sprayed. When fields are sprayed, they have signs up. It's like a no joke, like, don't go into this area because it's not safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So knowing that, like, the way you have a gag reflex towards, a piece of flank steak is like how I have a gag reflex to, no, that you can just touch a vegetable like, yeah, this is waxy. No, thank you. You know what I mean? So in my personal opinion, I mean, it's everyone's own preference, but I mean, cancer or no cancer, I'll choose the no cancer. But that's just me. To me, it's that easy. Like, I know there might be some more for some people. They want to dive into it a little more, but I'm sorry, for me, give me the no cancer option, please. It's just, I know that sounds crazy, but that's just where I'm at. It's just not. It's not so if I had to choose, I would say there's much more damage in cancer than in non-cancer. I mean, and we're talking about, like, we know cigarettes, can cause cancer, right? Pesticides are cancer. Are a known carcinogen. So it's like, pick your pick your poison, but I'd agree
Yeah.
with you. I'd say the low quality organic, as long as it doesn't have any of the pesticides and fertilizers and fungicides and herbicides, I'd say that would be the way to go personally. And it's the more ethical option as well as far as the environment and animals go.
Yeah, less animals are killed with the low quality organic, you think?
I absolutely they are. I mean, that's just. I mean, depending on I guess there are a few instances where if you were to play the name the trait game, you can say, well, in this imaginary, the factual reality is yes, less animals are going to be harmed in that process, and then even less animals are going to be harmed in a small local process. But to bring your point up on the cow thing, which I thought was pretty interesting. Like I said, I don't know as far as what meat costs are at the store and stuff, because I don't, like I said, I consume animal products, but none of them are. I don't go to the store at all for any animal products because there's no need to. But I think there is a very interesting point that you bring up as far as I mean, there are grain finished steaks out there on the market, and yes, a lot of animal deaths are in big plant agriculture. I mean, there's no denying that. I mean, that's why I think it's so important that we, vegans and omnivores and carnists alike, if they're going to practice this lifestyle, they should practice what they preach. And I tell this to I've gotten into some pretty heated arguments with some carnists too, because it's like, if you're going to eat meat, why would you buy from, a concentrated food op? You know what I mean? Like you're getting, I mean, it's like why I would tell anybody, why get lower quality food if you can get better quality food? Animal agriculture is horrendous. I don't think anyone will sit here and tell you that. And if they do, they're idiots, right?
Yeah.
But, like for example, for me, I mean, the fact that you could get an animal that can give you enough meat for a year, I mean, that's pretty reasonable. Me and my family, we hunt, and by hunt, I mean, if you have any hunters out there that know what they're talking about, let me rephrase. I bought a damage tag through the state in which I'm a part of. A damage tag is basically there was elk. These elk are destroying property. They're destroying farmland. They're destroying property. And so you have a tag to go shoot them. So we got tags to go shoot. And an elk can give you 300 to 400 pounds of meat. You know what I mean? And so this was a tag that was issued by the state because the damage they were causing to local townships and stuff. So in that respect, yeah, it's pretty easy. And there's more tags than there are hunters. I mean, there's not very many hunters in the world anymore, it seems. We're a dying breed. But yeah, I mean, I'm still consuming that. My family is still consuming it, and I'll be able to go get another elk before that meat is gone. Can everybody live like that? I'm not saying they can, but if you're looking at ethics, yeah, you're right. It's not in a vacuum. I mean, I would say John Kohler is probably, much more environmentally friendly than most, and he's a vegan, and he's like the shining example of what it is to be ethical. And then you got the guy or gal that, drinks a skinny latte at Starbucks and, buys quinoa from, one part of the world and this from another part of the world, and sits down and makes videos of them eating Burger King. I'm not speaking about any specific person, you know what I mean? Like vegan Burger King, and they try to act like they're all ethical. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you segue perfectly into that. I think where you and I are trying to go is in the right place. If everyone could be a John Kohler, I don't think we'd ever have wars, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said, I think he's an amazing man, and I think he is the epitome of what it is to be, when you're talking about just ethicality and gardening and self-reliance, and as far as food sovereignty goes, I have a lot of respect for the man. So yeah, I think that's how we should go about it. And like I said, I think if you're going to be a vegan and you're going to, do a lot of virtue signaling, and you're not John, well, I'm probably going to call you out on it, just like you would probably call them out on it, just like you would call a carnist out on it. You know what I mean? If they're just going to the store and buying a bunch of, raw meat and taking it to a vegan, trade show and eating it in front of them, like that, how is that more, you know what I mean? Like, how is that more ethical? I get what you're saying, and it's a great point.
Yeah, there is one sort of point which I think is important, which some people overlook. Well, a lot of people haven't seen the data on it. There was actually a study done on assessing food miles versus the type of food consumed. So they compared, for example, buying vegetables from the other side of America, or buying vegetables or fruits from Mexico, versus buying local meat. And because of the huge amount of fossil fuels used in factory farming and the intensive livestock operations and the huge amount of water and stuff like that, Despite the fact that if you live in Canada and you buy avocados from Mexico, despite the fact that that's a huge distance for your food to travel, and it's obviously not optimal in any way, shape, or form buying food from so far away, but despite that, it was still like better for the environment to buy your avocados from Mexico than it was to buy local like beef, because the beef was so wasteful in the production process, and it was so much fossil fuels and so much think about all those GM crops that are used to feed the animals, and all the oil that goes into the synthetic pesticide fertilizer and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think that factory farming and all that, it's horrible. I know for me, I mean, I'm obviously lucky enough. I have chickens, ducks, rabbits, all that, and they're all free raised. You know what I mean? Like I don't have to, like, this is, I'm looking at my rabbits right now, and they are outside, they free graze, they're in a huge tractor. And I just move the tractor around, and I don't have to buy food for them. The grass grows, the pasture grows naturally and stuff like that. And I know it's horrible because ultimately, they're going to be, they are going to be consumed. But at the end of the day, there's no food miles, there's no oil, there's no pesticides. Everything is a closed loop system, because that's the intent and design of the permaculture setting. And I mean, when it comes down to it, I think everybody has their own belief system when it comes to things. Like I said, I'm not trying to make Christians or atheists or anybody feel bad, but I do believe in personally I think in the cycle of life. When my time has come, I will be returned to the earth, and the earth will consume me, and I hope these rabbits eat me as well, and I hope I can produce energy for the ground around me. I definitely believe in that kind of that kind of system. So everybody has a different way of how they look at it, but should we all try to be better? Yes. And I think this is, like I said, I think it's pretty, I have to give you a lot of props, because I think you're the only person on YouTube to ever even touch this subject. And I think we should all be trying to be better. I'm trying to be better every single day, just because my number one thing for me is food sovereignty. That's my number one thing. It's not the environment. It's not, it's not the people. It's not this. It's not that. I mean, people that I love and stuff like that, but I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not some animal rights guy, obviously. I'm all about food sovereignty and doing the best I can for the environment. And that's what's funny. The only thing that got me, what actually got me watching your channel, you're one of the first channels that I started watching back in the day. I used to live off grid in an RV. I had a self-contained solar, the whole 9 yards. It's nice. I still have it. But yeah, and I was doing a video, because I was doing RV videos at the time, and I was doing a video of a conduction hot plate that was solar powered, and I had a vegan that just totally, and I was cooking pasture raised rabbit on it, and chicken, I believe. Oh man, these vegans came out of nowhere, and I'm like, what are these people talking about? Like, what is going on? Like, how can I'm literally off grid? I'm powering this thing with solar. You know what I mean? Like in my mind, I was completely like, wow, like this is ridiculous. And then somebody had made a link to somebody else, and then I kind of found you, because on the right, you were having a kind of a decent conversation with, I can't remember who it was. I'm like, this guy isn't too bad. And then 5 months ago, I saw that video. Well, not 5 months ago, like a month ago, I saw that video, and then I was just been thinking about it the last couple of weeks, and I'm like, you know what, I gotta reach out to this guy and see if he's still interested. But yeah, so it was just crazy that I was like, these vegans are attacking me. These I don't know where these vegans are located, but come on, like I'm cooking food and it's solar, using solar. I can't be that bad.
Yeah, I think the thing is there that there's slightly sort of like two different things going on. So on one hand, you get sort of like a golden badge for sort of environmental, local, ecosystem, food sovereignty, all that sort of cool stuff, which we both think is really good, and we both really agree on, despite me not being able to participate in that to the fullest extent that I would like, because I basically live in a city. I actually want to get some land at some point, buy a detached house with some land at some point to grow my own food. But we both basically agree on the environment and the ecosystem and that sort of stuff. But there's the thing that we don't agree on is the vegan bit, because you're not a vegan and I am. So the like when vegans get upset, it's because they're seeing animals getting killed or animals getting exploited or just tortured or whatever horrible stuff. And obviously vegans are always going to be opposed to eating meat, so that's just one of the things that we just are opposed to. Whether that's hunting, whether that's like I would agree that like hunting an animal and like eating all of the animal and putting it in your freezer and like eating it over a long period of time, like over the course of a year or whatever, and hunting it locally that was maybe an invasive species or something like that, then that's like way better on most levels than just going to the local store and buying meat in a packet, right? That like we can agree that that's way better. But what we don't agree on is the fact that I think that it's wrong to exploit animals or eat animals or kill animals in the first place. And that's something we're just going to disagree on. And I think
sure.
we don't really need to agree on that to have an interesting conversation. I think we've had a very interesting conversation today.
I agree with you. No, I agree with you. And I think the way you feel about that is exactly the same way I feel about, vegans that, go to the store and buy plant-based products from big plant agriculture. There's atrocities there. So I think that we have our biases, but I think it's awesome that you're open. And so if you live in a small place, I actually have a few suggestions that you might want to try.
Okay. I actually grew tomatoes on my windowsill at one point.
Yeah.
But that's the furthest I've gone.
Yeah, you should try. So there's just two things that you need. You don't need it, but it'll make it easier. So vertical gardening, I think if you have just any space at all, I think you should give that a try. And then they have this it's like a little pot. It's like a composting pot that you can put your vegetable scraps and stuff in because you're vegan, so it'd be all plant-based scraps. And then you can make a tea out of that, and you can just pour it directly into the center part of your vertical garden. Because these vertical gardens, the way they're set up is you can even get one that's a composter itself. So that would probably, if you wanted just to get the smallest, I can send you in an email after this, I can send you a couple designs that I have that I think are great. But they're composters that are vertical gardens all at the same time. So you can put your compost material in the center, and it slowly will drip into the grow bed portions of it. And it's really small and compact, and you can grow a bunch of stuff in it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's absolutely outstanding, and you can get quite a bit of food from it. You're not gonna be able to get everything, but you'll be able to get a lot. I think it'll be fun for you, and it'll be a way for you to kind of give back a little bit, and hopefully you can kind of share it with other vegans out there as well.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the Crop Share app, I'd highly recommend getting that too. That would also be another cool thing to get. Have you ever heard of it?
No, what was that? Sorry.
It's called the Crop Share app.
Oh, Crop Share app.
Yeah, have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't heard of that. I'm sure it's probably not going to be available in Spain, but for our listeners in the US,
I don't know. I think it is available. I think it's available internationally. It's basically home. It was at the. I go to these gardening conventions and stuff. Anyway, John is actually the one that got me on it, but it is a app where if you're a gardener, and I'm on there too. Not that you'll ever find me, but it's called Crop Swap, and if you're a gardener and you produce any kind of plant-based products and stuff, you can. It's like Uber for gardeners. So you can have somebody to pick it up, or you guys can meet up somewhere to come pick it up, and you guys can talk about the prices and everything there. You can show pictures of it. It's literally like Uber for gardeners.
Cool.
So if you have viewers that are really in dense populations, cities, like you can get organic produce, from people that grow it locally. And it's just a way for people to kind of meet each other. And I mean, everything's going to social media these days anyway. So those are the two big things, I'd say just kind of look into it, see what you think, and, one seed at a time, right?
Yeah, man, that sounds very interesting. Even just doing sprouts, like I was doing sprouts at sprouting, sort of like broccoli sprouts on not on my windowsill, but on my countertop. And even that's like the lowest entry level possible. Like it's so easy to do that, and at least then you're gonna get more fresh produce that's not been sitting on a shelf for a couple of days and in a lorry for a couple of days and in your fridge for a couple of days. At least just sprouts is just one step further to something a bit better. So I think there's a lot more that everyone can do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be that much of a challenge to start doing that.
No, I agree with you, and that's the thing, dude. It's small battles. Like you can look at somebody like myself or somebody else who's, like I said, born into this lifestyle, and it's like, well, that seems unattainable. Or you can just do one thing at a time, and I guarantee you, it's addicting. It's the most addictive drug out there, and you'll just be
Yeah.
like, wow, I love this, and you're gonna grow, and you're gonna add more to it, and before you know it, you're gonna be a master gardener in no time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're gonna
There's
be making all your own stuff. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like vertical gardening is great. You can make all the microgreens you need in the closet. Start making kimchi or ferment. I mean, fermented vegetables is like the easiest thing to do, man. And you can make your own recipe the way you like it, the way the way it tastes, and you're saving yourself a lot of money. You know what I mean? You have a couple of mason jars, some salt, some water, the herbs that you want in there, and you just saved yourself $10. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And you
man.
can have just the freshest, the best. It's going to be way more nutrient dense just because of the fermentation. Like I said, and you'll love it. I guarantee it.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I wanted to say before we wrap this up is like I appreciate the compliments and stuff. That there was one person who came to mind though who is definitely tackling this issue, but is a bit of a smaller YouTuber. Maybe you haven't heard of him. Conscientious omnivore. It's a bit of a mouthful sometimes, but yeah, he is a gardener as well. He really enjoys gardening. He argues for organic and veganic, and
Yeah, no, I watched I watched him with Dr. Avi.
okay,
And yeah, that I reached out to him too. He never reached back out to me, but I was really upset with what he was saying. And no, he seems like he seems like a great guy.
you upset with what
With
Dr. Arvi?
Yeah, it's just the
Yeah,
nonsense he was saying. It's like, come on, dude. But he's a doctor. He knows better. He knows better than everybody else. So
yeah. I think we've had a really interesting conversation, man. It's been very useful. I think maybe we should wrap it up now. It's been about 2 hours,
no,
and
I think it's great. Like I said, you mean I would only give you a compliment if I really believed it. And I think that you're obviously this conversation has never been had before. I think it's great that we kind of are different, but I think we want the same things overall. So I think it's awesome that you'd even have me on, and I think you and your viewers seem pretty cool. Like I said, I've listened to you for a while, and I hope you get your gains with Hench omnivore, herbivore, Hench herbivore, whatever big guy he is. But yeah, best of luck on your journey, and if you ever have any questions, or if you ever want to do this again, or if you ever wanted to have another discussion about, we could just talk about like, things that work, things that don't work, or just whatever, let me know. I'd be more than happy to come back on and,
cool,
clear
man.
up anything or just have a friendly talk. But yeah, it was awesome. And thank you. And thank your viewers for being great. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if it's cool with you, I'll send you the email to a couple of the vertical gardening stuff, and maybe you
Yeah,
find
man,
something you
definitely.
like, and you can showcase it here in next spring or something.
Yeah, man, definitely. It sounds very interesting. Like, you send it over and I'll take a look at that. So, yeah, man, thanks a lot for having this discussion. I think it's been really useful, some really interesting information here. And I think this is giving people more of an insight to a topic, as you say, which isn't discussed enough in the community, and it should be discussed more. And people need to know more about their food choices and where their food comes from, and the quality of the food as well. So yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation, man. Thanks for coming on, and yeah, have a good one where you are. It's morning where you are, or about lunchtime by now. So
Lunchtime, yeah.
yeah, have a good lunch then. So yeah, thanks a lot, man, and I'll speak to you another time.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
See you later.